Hello everyone, my name is Jordan Sabo and I'm going to be presenting my project proposal for the Immunology Lab at PerkinElmer Genetics for our project management class. PerkinElmer Genetics is a clinical lab that is part of a much larger corporation called PerkinElmer Incorporated, and we're located in Robinson Township, Pennsylvania. The lab's mostly known for newborn genetic screenings for babies all over the country and the world. In the past 2 years, the lab has begun expanding into other areas, though, such as sequencing, metabolomics, prenatal screening, and immunology. One of the acquisitions made was the purchase of Euroimmun, a German company headquartered in Lubeck, Germany, with the U.S. headquarters in New Jersey. Starting in January, I worked in partnership with our lab director to start the immunology lab that will accommodate the instruments and tests necessary to begin testing for Lyme disease, food sensitivity, and inhaled allergens. Additional space was purchased in the existing building and furnished to be new lab space. Starting a new lab will require the purchase and setup of all the new instruments, validation testing, ordering supplies, hiring and training additional people, and ultimately running clinical testing. So this is what I wanted to use is the continuation of this that we started back in January for my project. So the main beneficiary of this project will be PerkinElmer Genetics, as this test is going to bring in a lot of revenue to the lab that currently has very low margins on the existing newborn screen tests that they have been completing for 20 plus years. The next beneficiary is the pilot client we are doing the testing for. They're called Everlywell, and they're a growing company in the direct-to-consumer lab testing industry. They appeared on Shark Tank in 2017 and are currently at approximately 35 different tests that they offer using labs all over the country. Some of those tests will be run in our PerkinElmer lab in Pittsburgh. The final beneficiary is the patient. The platform of these tests is designed to offer diagnostic and/or screening information on people's health at a low cost, and they're easy for patients to take at home without having to see a doctor or get expensive blood draws. The specimen is collected by a spring-activated finger lancet that punctures the patient's finger so that blood droplets can fall onto a filter paper card, which is then allowed to dry and mailed into the lab. So the project charter, our purpose is to establish an immunology lab for the Euroimmun instruments, but we're going to use it for clinical testing. The description of the project is that the immunology lab at PerkinElmer will start by offering the two immunology-based tests, one for Lyme disease, one for food sensitivity. Lyme is going to be an ELISA method, and then the immunoblot test follow-up if it reflexes as a positive. The food sensitivity is all going to be run on the immunoblot platform. Our objective is to validate Lyme disease, 3 different food sensitivity profiles, and then later on inhaled allergens assays. Our success for criteria or expected benefits, we want to have a high operation established by the end of 2019, and we want our turnaround time to be less than 2 days. So funding, we're going to have funding will be for 25 instruments and 10 lab technicians, but we're going to have an unlimited soft cap because our goal is to expand. Our major deliverables, the lab director and the lead clinical lab scientist, which is me, are to produce the validation plans, reports, SOPs, and any necessary worksheets to perform the testing according to the statement of work with Everlywell. We also want to follow PerkinElmer standards and Everlywell standards. Once live, these deliverables will transition to results for the patient's desired test within 2 business days from receipt of the specimen. Our acceptance criteria are going to be the validation plans, validation reports, SOPs, worksheets, staff backgrounds, and a quality control system that will meet or exceed CLIA standards. So here you can see our anticipated schedule for the project. Starting with the construction of the additional lab space, we have to set up the lab. I'm going to be the first one that would have been trained by the Euroimmun field service engineer, and then we'll start acquiring more instruments, we'll start writing our SOPs, and we're going to start with the Lyme assay. Once the Lyme assay is validated and approved, it can get put into our LIMS system to start processing, and then we can sign off on the reports and launch that test. At that point, the volume will start to increase so we can begin hiring additional people and training them just in time to start our food sensitivity 96 profile. We'll do the same thing with our validation reports and integration, and then we'll launch it. Eventually, the Food 96 profile is going to rapidly increase, as that'll be our highest volume test. So we'll have to add more people and update our workflow to handle the high volume. We'll be expected to make improvements to our LIMS system, our SOPs, and our workflow. Probably acquire additional instruments, and then we'll go into our Food 108 and 204 validations and launch. And then if we get to the inhaled allergen testing this year, which is the plan, we'll repeat the process for new tests. And this is where our soft cap comes into play. We're going to be able to continue with funding, adding people, adding instruments to accommodate the new tests as it grows. So the leadership team is going to consist of PJ Barandi, who's our PerkinElmer Genetics site leader. Taraka Dante, my boss, is the immunology lab director and main project manager. My name is Jordan Sabo, and I'm the lead clinical lab scientist who will also serve as the secondary project manager for all internal lab operations. Jessica Kinkman is the Everlywell project manager. Brittany Leadstrand is the Everlywell lab operations director. Kim Pacella is the Euroimmune project manager, and Lauren Basil is the Euroimmune field service engineer. From a quality control standpoint, we have to have SOPs and assay validations completed prior to clinical approval. On the instruments, we're going to have internal qualification, outside qualification, and performance qualification of all of our instrumentation and tools prior to clinical use. Operational qualification, I meant to say. So the internal qualification is how it's delivered. Operational is going to be how it performs during installation, and performance will be our validations. As far as all of our standards, they have to meet the Clinical Laboratory Improvement Act standards, as well as the College of American Pathologists accreditation, which is an organization we belong to aid in maintaining CLIA standards. Also, we'll have formal employee training prior to clinical exposure. The work breakdown structure shows a flowchart of steps that will occur to complete the project, along with who is assigned for producing the deliverables of each step. So again, this is a little bit hard to see. It looks better on my Microsoft project, but Taraka is going to be mainly in charge of hiring employees. I'll be in charge of training them as the lead. I'll also be in charge of lab setup. Amanda Hancock, who is our quality management coordinator, will be in charge of document control, and then I will be the lead on assay development. And then we begin to delegate more as we get into the individual details that are associated with each of those work packages. The responsibility assignment matrix shows all team members responsible for producing deliverables throughout the project, and it also designates primary and support responsibilities for each deliverable. Additional team members from PKIG, Everlywell, and Euroimmune are not included here if they are not responsible for a deliverable. However, they may assist the team member responsible. So on my responsibility assignment matrix, I have each of my work items listed. As you can see, the main people that are going to be primary responsibilities on the projects will be Taraka, myself, Everlywell, and then the Euroimmune people such as Lauren Basil, who will do a lot of the training. I've also listed Leanna Brooks, Jada Bailey, and Trevor Horst, who were my original employees hired on towards the beginning of the project. The network diagram is presented as a flowchart displaying what order the tasks have to be completed after designating the predecessors for each task. I did my best to combine views of it together from MS Project. With the network diagram being so large, it's much easier to view there where it was created. The project schedule shows the work steps in a table, and the timeline presented as a graphic is the Gantt chart. This shows how long each task should take based on the assigned predecessors. Had everything run according to schedule, the project could be completed in 260.5 days and ending in June 2019. As always expected, though, we ran into various issues out of our control that delayed the project beyond the potential schedule, but everything is still scheduled to be completed by the end of this month, 2019. And here's the Gantt chart from MS Project as well. Now going into resource usage, it's very heavy with clinical lab testing being very hands-on. This resource usage chart shows both the hours required for each task along with non-human resources such as travel expense, instrument expense, and supply expense. And again, as you can see, as the main project manager for internal lab operations, as the clinical lead scientist, I have the bulk of the work, which just kind of comes with that position. Our estimated cost table displays the cost of resources as well as costs for each work item. All costs are subject to increase as human resources and instruments are added to accommodate the increase in sample volume. As a result, the estimates provided are actually expected to be lower than the actual costs at the completion of the project, but like I said, the project is expected to continue growing beyond the scope of what we have planned out here, and we'll have funding to accommodate that. So if you see from here, based on our estimated costs, we're coming in at around $532,000 for the project. Our risk register organizes the risks based on the degree of impact and likelihood of occurrence, but also includes details of the impact should a risk occur, along with an action that will trigger an already prepared response plan. Some of the risks that we run into are system failures on the instruments. Deionized water is an important one, so we have to have a system that can do that. Any type of failed quality control values on a clinical run could result in having to repeat samples. Same goes for our validation runs. A lot of these things we have to be able to have successful data before we can move forward. So a risk register is extremely important in a clinical lab such as this, where you're going to be providing health information to people. So as a result, we can kind of expect the project to have a lot of extensions throughout, because clinical health information is not something you want to rush or fudge. So we really take a lot of time to investigate without worrying about as much about how it extends the project. So then you can see our resource overview directly from MS Project. And again, you can see here, I have the most resources allocated to me, with Taraka following behind, who's my boss. So that is to be anticipated, as we're the two main people managing the project. And then from the client side, Everlywell is responsible as far as the launches go for all the marketing, getting the product out on the web so that it can be sold and brought to us. So they're an important player from a resource perspective too, but we don't have to pay them as a resource. We're paying them for samples that are resulted only. And then when we go into our cash flow overview, you see that based on the costs put in, we actually come out to a little bit under our estimated cost, which is $517,034. So that's good. That's actually a very small number compared to what we're going to be spending in the future. There are a lot of other expenses once we get set up for clinical testing, such as the cost of the kits. We spend about $700,000 just per shipment of reagents that we can use to run patient samples. There's overhead costs that we're going to have, such as doing maintenance on the machines, paying our additional employees as they come in, electricity, the water bill. A lot of these things were not anticipated into this project proposal, or not included, because they're not really part of the launch. Those are just going to be normal operational costs once the project is up and going. And at that point, we're going to have revenue coming in anyway to offset that, and we'll actually be profiting a very significant amount of money per sample that runs. So the launch of the immunology lab project between PerkinElmer, Euroimmun, and Everlywell is a large stepping stone to establishing the lab so that PKIG can confidently expand the platform and offer more tests and potentially add more clients as well. At the end of the project, the expectation is to have at least 10 full-time employees on staff to keep the lab operating 7 days per week. The test menu will include Lyme disease, all the food sensitivity tests, and inhaled allergens by the end of the first quarter 2020, and we expect to accommodate 1,000 sample per day forecast.